Mara Vellin was not the kind of person who believed in accidents. Everything had structure, pattern, logic, even folklore, even myths. That belief is what brought her into the restricted section of the university library that night, tracing a draft of cold air that should not have existed inside a sealed building. The wall behind the bookshelf looked wrong when she noticed it, too clean compared to the age around it, like reality itself had been patched over something it didn't want remembered. And when her fingers pressed into it, the surface yielded as if it had been waiting for her specific touch. The staircase behind it did not creak like old wood. It sounded like silence being broken for the first time in a long time. Each step downward removed her further from the world she understood, until even the idea of the surface above felt distant, irrelevant, almost fictional. And at the bottom, the archive revealed itself, not as a room, but as an endless decision made in darkness. Books lined every wall, all identical in their dull, grey bindings, as if individuality had been erased before they were even written. In the center, a lectern held a single open book. Her name was already written inside it. Mara should have left the moment she saw her name. That would have been the rational response, the expected one. But curiosity is rarely logical, and the archive seemed to understand that better than she did. The book did not behave like paper and ink. It responded to her presence, its blank pages slowly filling themselves as her attention lingered, as if observation itself was a form of instruction. The first sentence was not read, it was realized inside her mind before her eyes even finished tracing it. A warning formed in language that felt older than speech, suggesting that what she was engaging with did not simply record reality, but negotiated it. And then the text began describing her life with uncomfortable precision, not just who she was, but who she had been moments before reading it, as if even her past was being updated in real time. Behind her, the stairs she had descended no longer existed. Only a wall remained, smooth and absolute, as though escape had never been part of the design. And when the pages turned on their own, Mara understood the most important rule of the archive. Nothing here stayed unchanged once it was acknowledged she was no longer alone, but the realization did not come with footsteps or sound. It came with absence, the subtle removal of certainty from the air around her. Something stood between the shelves, but it refused to stabilize into a single form. It shifted constantly, like reality struggling to render it properly. When it spoke, the sound carried the sensation of forgotten language trying to reconstruct itself. It identified itself as a librarian, but the word felt incomplete, like a title that had been stretched beyond its original meaning. It explained nothing directly. Instead, it hinted that it was once human, though even that concept felt unreliable in its presence. The librarian warned her that the book she held was not stable. That it had not finished deciding what she was. And in the archive, unfinished stories did not wait patiently. They expanded. They adapted. They consumed context until only one version of reality remained. And as Mara looked around at the endless shelves, she realized every book might be doing the same thing, waiting for attention to make them real. The village did not begin as a place. It began as a description. Halewick Hollow appeared first in the margins of the book, then in its main text, then in Mara's thoughts when she was not actively reading. It grew with disturbing consistency, as if it had always existed and was simply waiting for permission to be noticed. The more she read, the more detailed it became. Roads formed that did not obey geography. Houses leaned inward as though listening to conversations that had not yet been spoken. A church appeared whose bell rang only when names were forgotten, though she had not yet understood what that meant. And then the text shifted again, subtly but unmistakably. It included her not as a visitor, not as an observer, but as someone arriving on a specific night, as though her presence had already been scheduled within the narrative structure of the village itself. And when she tried to stop reading, she discovered something far worse than compulsion. The story no longer required her participation. It had already begun continuing without her permission. Halewick Hollow did not greet her. It absorbed her arrival without acknowledgement, as though she had always been part of its composition. The air felt thick with unfinished sentences, and the ground beneath her feet responded slightly too slowly, like reality was lagging behind intention. People moved through the streets without fully registering her presence. Their eyes slid away not out of indifference, but because she did not yet fully belong to their version of existence. And yet she could feel herself being adjusted, rewritten at a fundamental level, as ink-like stains began to spread beneath her skin, subtle but permanent. When someone finally spoke to her, it felt like correction. The woman's voice did not ask who she was. It confirmed it. As though Mara's identity was something that had been partially written and was now being finalized through interaction. And in that moment, she understood that in Hailwick Hollow, recognition was not social, it was structural. Being seen meant being completed. The librarian found her at the edge of the village where fog gathered like unfinished memory. It did not approach like a person. It aligned itself into presence, as if deciding how much humanity it needed in that moment. It finally admitted what the archive truly was, not a place of knowledge, but a containment structure designed to hold narratives too unstable for the world outside. Stories that resisted closure. Events that refused interpretation. Entire realities that threatened to overwrite their surroundings. But containment had consequences. Stories did not remain passive when confined. They adapted. Some learned to escape by rewriting the readers who engaged with them. Hailwick Hollow was one of those stories. And Mara was not an accidental visitor. She was part of its adaptive mechanism, a correction attempt, a way for the narrative to stabilize itself through her assimilation. And when she asked if she could leave, the librarian did not answer immediately. Instead, it looked at her as though measuring how much of her was still original. Resistance did not behave the way she expected. Every attempt to reject the narrative structure only strengthened its hold, as though opposition was simply another form of participation. The village responded to her defiance by adjusting around it, incorporating her refusal into its logic. The church at the center of Hailwick Hollow became unavoidable, not through force, but through inevitability. It was not that she was drawn to it, it was that every path eventually resolved into it. Inside, the book waited on the altar, fully formed now, containing not just her life, but the assumption that it was already complete. The librarian told her the only way out was to write something stronger than what was written. But even as she heard the words, she understood the trap within them. Because the story had already accounted for her reaction. It had already written the hesitation, the doubt, the resistance. And somewhere deep in the structure of Hailwick Hollow, something was quietly confident she would not be able to outright what had already finished her. When Mara finally wrote, the world reacted as though injured. The ink did not simply replace text, it disrupted it. Hailwick Hollow began to lose coherence, pieces of itself dissolving as narrative stability failed. Streets lost meaning. Names stopped attaching to identities. Even the idea of place started to degrade. The collapse was not loud. It was systematic, like a story being carefully erased by something that understood exactly how it had been constructed. And in the center of it, Mara kept writing, not with confidence, but with necessity, as though stopping would mean being absorbed entirely. Eventually, silence returned, not emptiness, but reset. The archive remained. Unchanged. Waiting. As if it had simply paused and resumed, but something subtle had shifted. Somewhere inside its endless structure, a new book had already formed. And this one did not begin with an unknown name. It began with hers. And this time, the archive did not need her to open it. It would open itself.